Marcia Chan. I'm one of the co-coordinators, and I'm joined here by my co-coordinators.
Hi everyone, I'm Patrick Mrozek.
There's
Donna
Patrick.
Brinton.
And Donna. All right. And you know, we all love to do things related to teaching and learning of pronunciation and things that are related to pronunciation, like listening and speaking and oral communication and those sorts of things. I want to tell you that we're so excited to have a really excellent lineup coming up from Top IG, from our Teaching a Pronunciation Interest Group. Of course, you know, today we're having John Levis on corrective feedback. That's good enough. And May 1st, we're having Betsy Parrish talk about discovery-based pronunciation with adult MLs, multilingual learners, teaching for intelligibility. June 26th, we're going to have Agata Guskarowska, one of the authors of Teaching Pronunciation with Confidence, the OER. And in July, we're having July 17th. Note that the time will be different. We normally have our sessions at 12 noon in California, but we do need to take into consideration those who are far, far away on the other side of the globe. So Amanda Baker will talk about intonation, pragmatics, and a dash of Gen AI, tackling the impossible, and we'll do that at 3 p.m. California time in order for her to be awake when she presents. Isn't that a good idea? Well, so those of you who know who are members of CATISL, we have our CATISL top at catisl.org, the member methodology for interacting on the message boards. We also have a Facebook group. We have a top Padlet where we keep a lot of our excellent recordings of previous events. So be sure to access that whenever you can and whenever you want to go back and see some of the great presentations that you either missed or you want to review. Besides that, we have our LinkedIn group, Facebook groups. So if you are members of either one of those groups, you should be able to find us as CATISL Top and be able to join us there. Be sure to join our Top IG e-list. It's one that'll give you just a single message. It tells you when our events are coming up so you don't miss a thing. It doesn't matter whether you're a member or not of CATISL, but you know, for $30, you could save yourself a whole bunch of $5 when you want to come to an event, not only for Top, but other IGs, chapters, and level events as well. You can subscribe to our channel on YouTube, which is conveniently called at CATISL_YouTube, and that's where we have recordings of various events put on by IGs, levels, and chapters. Now let's talk about Dr. John Levis. We're so happy to have this distinguished professor of applied linguistics and TESOL. He's the director of the cross-disciplinary linguistics program at Iowa State University. Now, he earned a lot of degrees, but the most recent ones are his MA and PhD at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He studies second language pronunciation and speech intelligibility with a focus on how second language pronunciation research affects the teaching of pronunciation. He's the author of the book Intelligibility, Oral Communication, and the Teaching of Pronunciation. He is one of the co-authors of the new open educational resources book, Teaching Pronunciation with Confidence, a resource book for teachers and learners. And we're going to have a special session in June on this OER by one of his co-authors. John Levis is the founding editor of the Journal of Second Language Pronunciation and the co-editor of Phonetics and Phonology section of the Encyclopedia for Applied Linguistics, and 4 books. My guy, this guy is so busy. Social Dynamics in Second Language Accent, The Handbook of English Pronunciation, Critical Concepts in Linguistics Pronunciation, and Second Language Pronunciation Bridging the Gap Between Research and Teaching. He's the founder of the annual Pronunciation in Second Language Learning and Teaching Conference, and we are looking forward to returning to Iowa State University this September 10th through 12th, when John and his colleagues will host the 17th PSLT, or PSLLT, as Californians like to say, conference. John has presented before for us at KTSL Topic, and you can access our topic Padlet to view the recordings of his talks on teaching suprasegmentals and how to benefit from PSLLT conference and proceedings. We are extremely fortunate to have John return to our Teaching of Pronunciation intergroups today to inform us on corrective feedback that is good enough. Welcome, John.
Hi. Um, you're going to hear noise here because I am in the Midwest and I happen to be in the midst of a storm. My apologies. Thank you for inviting me. And I didn't know I was supposed to be in Georgia when I said yes to this date. So thank you, Marcia, for tolerating my chaos here.
Love it,
Uh,
love it.
what I'd like to do is go ahead and start and talk about this topic about corrective feedback that is good enough. This comes from an article that I and colleagues did for a National Science Foundation grant. And we were working on developing automatic feedback that a computer system could give to people on their pronunciation. And what we wanted to do was have a system that didn't make mistakes. Either it didn't make mistakes by telling people that their pronunciation was right when they wasn't, or it didn't make mistakes by saying their pronunciation was fine when they actually had done something wrong. And this is actually a little bit more difficult than you would expect. Um, and so this is where we are going with this article. These are the names of my colleagues: Aleph Silpace, Reza Neres, Mackenzie Novotny, Ricardo Gutierrez Osuna, and Yevgeny Chukharov. So I want to talk a little bit about feedback before we get into the actual study. We know that implicit feedback, such as recasts, um, when you just react to somebody's feedback, but it sounds like you're actually just listening to them, and explicit feedback, such as obvious corrections, can be effective. But explicit feedback is usually more effective at helping learners improve their pronunciation. And this kind of feedback can come from teachers, it can come from peers, or it can come from computers. And there's a study that I've put here for Ines Martin and Lisa Lotte Sippel on peer and teacher feedback. They do really, really interesting work. What they do is they find that when people give feedback to their peers, the ones who improve are actually the feedback givers. And in this study that they looked at peer feedback, teacher feedback, and no feedback at all. And what they found was that feedback worked. In the short run, peer and teacher feedback worked equally well. But in the long run, when you come back and you do what we would call a delayed post-test, teacher feedback, people kind of forget it. But if they get feedback from their peers, their improvement continues. So really interesting work that they do. When we're going to be talking about computer feedback or pretend computer feedback, this is rarely perfect. If you've used things like Duolingo or Busuu or Babbel or all these other ones. Some of them will give you feedback by telling you that you've got an 83% score on your pronunciation, a number that is completely opaque and almost means nothing. Other feedback systems will tell you you had trouble saying your TH sounds or these vowels or things like that. And that's the kind of feedback that we're looking at here. So computers sometimes hear errors where humans don't, or they don't hear errors where humans will. So we're trying to build a system that matches those two together. The other thing is that these computer-assisted pronunciation training tools are not close to 100% accurate. They're up actually to about 80% accurate at this point, which is amazing. But for a long, long time, the highest that they ever got was about 70% accurate. And so our question was, how perfect does that feedback need to be? And so we're trying to test whether good enough feedback, not perfectly accurate, can lead to meaningful pronunciation improvement. If you dislike my background on this PowerPoint, I want to tell you that I made it with an AI program and I spent more time fixing it than, than I saved by making it this way. And this is the background they gave me. Sorry about that, but. So the study design, we had 30 native Chinese speakers, most of them Mandarin speakers. They were international students at Iowa State. We were the U.S. university. Um, we gave them a single session of computer-assisted pronunciation training on 9 English sound contrasts. So there were 3 of those. They were in 3 groups of 3. We picked them according to information that we had about what kinds of difficulties Chinese speakers typically had with English vowels and consonants. And then we had raters who were 27 native English speakers who made forced choice comparisons of pre and post test recordings. So, for example, they would hear uh, seat and sit. And they would hear those two next to each other and they would decide which one was better. So we're looking not at perfect accuracy, but in terms of did they improve? Were there more post-test recordings that were um, rated better than pre-test recordings? Okay, here we go. So the Chinese participants, were told that the study was testing 3 different systems of providing feedback. They were told that each system would look the same on the screen, but that the systems might behave differently. So each person had feedback from all 3 systems. They didn't know which one was which. 3 of the contrasts that they had were given 100% accurate feedback. 3 were 66% accurate feedback, and 3 were 33% accurate feedback. So 1 out of every 3 things that they got information on was right. Okay. So it says neither the wizard nor the participants knew what kind of feedback. So that leads us to this question about the wizard. And the wizard, if you've seen The Wizard of Oz, the original movie, remember this is the person behind the curtain, the person who's giving the wise information. And we had a wizard in our study. Okay, let's go here. So we had a protocol that is actually called the Wizard of Oz protocol. What we have is a phonetically trained human listener who is behind the curtain, so to speak, who provided real corrective feedback. And it was always delivered within 8 seconds, which is what a computer-based system will do as well. The participants believed that the feedback that they got came from an automated system. So there was no automated system. We were creating it. Their feedback accuracy, which was always excellent, the wizard was really good at this and had a very simple task, was computationally modified within the study to create the three systems. So the wizard didn't know that their feedback was going to be modified in a certain way. They gave perfect feedback. But behind the scenes, the computer system introduced errors in the feedback. So in the 66% system, they got 1 out of every 3 was given incorrect feedback. So maybe they had a correct pronunciation and they were told that they had done badly, or they had incorrect and they were told they had done well. So this is what it looked like. They recorded these phrases like very wild, and the phrases all had these contrasts within them. This one was V and W. Or E and it, or S and the. And they had 72 phrases, 9 different contrasts, 8 phrases per contrast. And the corrective feedback was limited to 3 options. They were either given correct feedback, the targeted sound was highlighted as accurate, or incorrect, it was identified as the other phoneme if they had done it right, or they were given other feedback that was not, it was just kind of slightly confusing, the kind of feedback that they would get. So what we found in this study was that if you look at the graph, you've got system one. System one is our 100% system. System two is our 66% system. And system three is our 33% system. So some of the things that they were tested on their pretest and post-test were items that they were actually trained on. Some of the things that they were tested on in their pretest and post-test, they were not trained on. They did not get training. And then system three is at 33%. So basically, 1 out of 3 things were correct. What you see is that system one and two, the 100% system, the 3 out of 3, or the 66 system, 2 out of 3 being given good feedback, they didn't have any differences between them. People improved on the things they were trained on, and they seem to improve about the same amount. So that's where you see those green lines. They're almost perfectly aligned. But when you get to the third system, the system 33, where 2 out of every 3 items are wrong, um, this one is actually significantly worse. And you don't see any difference between things they were trained on and things they were not trained on. This is not a good system for us. For the untrained items, there were no significant differences among the 3 systems. So what we know there is that the training didn't help on new items. And it's likely that, we only did a single session of training, about an hour, and that was probably too short for learning. And then we also had 9 sound contrasts in one session. And so we probably created a bit of cognitive overload for the people who are participating. Okay. We asked the participants to rate the system accuracy. So after the first 3 items, we asked them to say, is this a good system for providing feedback? And what you see is that when they got perfect feedback, the wizard's feedback coming to them straight from without the system messing it up, they thought it was really pretty good. System 66, they found was not as good. They found it less trustworthy, less accurate than System 100. But System 33, they found the least accurate. So they really could perceive differences in the feedback accuracy between the systems. But the 2 systems at the top, 166, produced equivalent pronunciation gains. So the question then becomes, why was imperfect feedback sometimes good enough? What we thought is that learners can filter out occasional errors, that learners could still filter out occasional errors and benefit from the feedback because it was overall pretty reliable. Um, in contrast, System 33 probably was seen as untrustworthy because learners got to a point that they distrusted that the system was giving them good feedback. And then they kind of quit paying attention to the feedback it provided. There's also a potentially an accuracy ceiling that their perception and production limitations may cap how the effects of even perfect feedback um, were perceived. This is the AI getting me, sorry. Um, so one of the examples of this was that a lot of our participants had really good TH sounds, really good thetas. But if the system told them that they um, had made mistakes on their thetas, they believed the system because they seemed to be less confident that their theta was really being produced correctly. And they kind of trusted the system even when perhaps they shouldn't have there. And then another reason may have been that our English spelling system may limit production accuracy in the way that people pronounce things. Because remember, they're looking at words here, and that may have caused them to have some difficulty in distinguishing between 100% and 66%. So some implications. Good enough can mean that we actually provide inaccurate feedback. The corrective feedback at 66% accuracy was as effective for all those trained items. And that from a computer point of view, that means that our CAP tools don't need to be perfect, but they do need to be trustworthy. Below 66, in other words, more wrong than right, feedback seems to lose its benefit if the system is not accurate. We didn't test how low a system could be before learners mistrust it. That would be an interesting study for the future. We just did the 3 out of 3, 2 out of 3, 1 out of 3. And then the idea here for good enough, a good enough threshold, may be different between proficiency levels or for different sound types, for multi-session training designs. We don't know. These would be interesting things to do. But remember, we were doing this to kind of test whether our own system, our own computer system, had to be closer to 100 than it did to closer to 66. And we found actually it didn't. So, a few questions just for discussion for everybody. Um, this was a computer system, but do teachers have to always be accurate in the feedback they provide? And will students always need to understand the feedback? My own students don't always get what I'm clearly explaining, I think clearly. And then another question then would be, would articulatory advice improve the effectiveness of the feedback? We did not try that. Um, and so I'm going to stop there. I would be happy to take anyone's questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much for giving us that the background on this, I guess, experiment. Did this
It
end up
was an
being
experiment, yeah.
did it end up being implemented into some sort of a computer applied situation?
Um, it was, we ran out of money before we got there.
Okay, all right, yeah, money, kind of, yeah. Let's see. So, just one other question. You had 30 participants.
Yes.
Yeah, and you said something about three groups of three, but I'm thinking maybe you meant three groups
No,
of 10.
it was three groups of three sounds. So we had nine sound contrasts.
Yeah, nine sound contrasts and three
Like
groups
like
of.
like VW and
Oh, okay,
and each of those sound contrasts was in a group of three things that were given a treatment of either 100 or 66 or 33.
okay, okay. So
And
that was.
and for each participant, the group of three that they got was decided by the computer system.
And each group of three then was it all one type? They were all either 100% accurate or they were 60%, 66%,
Yes.
or they were 33.
Yes. Yeah.
So the whole
So
group, so at least for the three group, yeah, because I was trying to figure out when you asked them, the participants, about their sort of the trustworthiness or, the whether they, I was wondering how they would know each system because I thought it might be anonymous, but you're saying because
no,
they were clustered.
it was anonymous. So like 10 of those 30 people started with 100% accurate. The next three were 66. The next three were 33. The next group of 10, and they were all doing this individually. So um, they were distributed this way. They started with 33, and then they went to 100, and then they went to 66. The last group started with 66 and then went to 33 and then to 100. So we kind of um, counterbalanced which sounds they were getting for which system. We were testing systems rather than whether they did better with one system for vowels and one for consonants. We just wanted to see whether the systems worked equally well or there was a difference between them.
What about the when you talked about the degree of incorrectness? So
Yes.
your first one is perfectly good feedback, and are you talking about corrective feedback that tells them what they did wrong and how to do it better? Can you give some can you give some
So
qualitative information about the three
so
feedback systems?
for an example, do you see the training interface here?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so what they would see, they would say very wild. And if they said very wild and they were getting perfectly accurate feedback, they would be told that that V was pronounced like a W. And they would be told that the W was pronounced like a W. So they were given feedback on both parts of the sound contrast. Um, and that's what the wizard would do. The wizard would give perfect feedback. But if they were in a 66% system for that sound, it might be that the system would tell them that V was correct and W was incorrect. This was decided by the programming for the system. The wizard kept giving perfect feedback, but the wizard's feedback was interpreted by the computer system to either be correct or incorrect in some way. Does that make sense?
Okay, so the feedback was only on if it was correct, but not on how to correct an incorrect
Right.
pronunciation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I'm
Yes.
sorry, I'm
Yeah,
using
we
this word
did.
too often, but I'm trying to understand because we're talking about how we give feedback and what kind
Yes.
of feedback is helpful, but it sounds very restricted on the
It was
feedback.
very it,
Correct,
it
not
was
correct.
it yes, it was restricted. It
Mhm.
was what we could do with the system.
Yeah,
What
okay.
we did not want is for them to we did not build into the thing saying, oh, W is made with your lips rounded and V is
Okay,
made.
so that was not part of it at all.
No, so we gave corrective feedback that was explicit. We told them whether it was right or wrong, and we told them what they did instead,
Uh-huh.
but we did not tell them how to make the sounds.
Ew. Okay. Oh, and then Patrick has his hand up. So let's have Patrick
Yes,
ask
thank
a
you.
question.
So I have a question um, about that, about the level of how explicit the feedback was. So, for instance, in the contrast, very wild, if the
Mhm.
student said, let's say, very wild, would both V and W be highlighted? Or would
Yes, by they would be given correct feedback by the wizard.
if they mix them up? If
Yeah,
they said very wild, would they
yeah,
would
they would
get
the wizard would say your V was like a W and your W was like a V. But remember that the wizard doesn't have any control over whether the computer system reinterprets that feedback as being accurate as delivered or changing it.
I see. But my question was more about whether the feedback was so specific that it would actually uh, highlight each of the two sounds as
Yes,
either correct
yes,
or incorrect.
yes, it
Okay.
would.
Wonderful.
And they have 8 of these phrases and they saw each one 2 times.
Thank you. And we have a question in the chat from
Okay.
Lori, um, whether the in the 66% group were the errors in feedback distributed randomly among the contrasts, or did they get consistently accurate feedback on any particular contrasts?
No, they were distributed randomly among the contrasts. So if you're looking at 24 items and 2 times each with 2 contrasts in each, that's 96. So what you would have is 64 of the items of feedback would be correct and 32 would be incorrect, but they would be distributed randomly. And you could have incorrect feedback so that if there was a mistake, the system would say, oh, it was fine. Um, it just was not accurate.
Okay, so that was my question. Sorry. So I'm assuming the improvement was, like you're saying, was made because maybe the participants disregarded some of those incorrect instances, instances of incorrect feedback, but it wouldn't have been because maybe they improved in some sounds, but not in others.
Right, right. Because what we were not looking at there, remember they did the same recordings pre and post. So we did see that they did improve. But what we were trying to get at was not did they improve in a particular sound because it was um, something that they knew that they were doing. We we just wanted to see was it if we mess with the feedback accuracy, which we couldn't do with a computer system. We had to use a computer to um, change human feedback. If we change the accuracy, will they still improve like they might when they have perfectly accurate feedback? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but we can also assume that they did get some accurate feedback
Yeah, they did.
on every phoneme as
They got
opposed to.
accurate feedback in each system.
Mhm.
The 33% system meant that they got more inaccurate than accurate, but they did get accurate feedback. And we suspect that even with the 66 system, the 2 out of 3 system, they just did better because they trusted the feedback and they were able to kind of filter out places where the feedback was not right. We know that when people use apps anyway, that they use them with um, a little bit of distrust of the accuracy of the feedback, especially with pronunciation. And so, what we think is just that they trusted it enough to get something out of the feedback. I think Ellen, you had your hand up.
Yes, John, I just wanted to make a comment. I came into pronunciation research a bit late because I was teaching composition, and we did research on did writers need corrective feedback in order to improve? And we found that was true. And, I'm beginning to believe that in the way you learn languages is different from memorizing. You need corrective feedback in order to improve. So, it's a little bit difficult just in a short time to understand your research. I think it's very valuable, particularly as we move into the age of AI. So I would like to make a very positive comment on what you did.
Thanks, Ellen. Um, I I've always wondered about this because I don't know if you've had students like I've had, but I'll have students who tell me, I want you to correct all my errors. You know, is like I think I'm not a machine and and I don't want to correct all your errors because it's not going to be helpful for you. And so this is a kind of variant of that question that do you want my correction to always be understandable to you? I tend to talk too much when I give them feedback. I don't just say your W sounds like a V,
Hmm.
which is what our system was telling them.
That must have been
But
really, really hard.
What I'd like to intersperse here in the research that we did, and I think I'll send you a copy of my textbook, we divided it into most important errors and less important errors, how they affected being able to understand what you'd written. And that worked out really well because we did not put an emphasis on all errors. It's way too much. And they've proved that if you go over 3 errors per 100 words, that's when things become you can't understand that well. So what you're doing really goes right along with what we did in composition errors. So thanks, John.
Patrick, you asked how is Gemini able to give feedback on pronunciation? So there's one of my colleagues, Sinem Sonsat Hagelheimer, and her co-author, Shebnam Kurt, who looked at how Gemini compared to the program called Pronounce. And they looked at how the feedback worked. And yes, you're right. The Gemini basically does ASR dictation. Pronounce gave much more explicit feedback, but they found that the people who took part in their study both benefited from the feedback as long as they knew how to use it. And the learning curve for learning how to pronounce better was harder with Gemini simply because they had to take that extra step of um, connecting it to um, the the transcript.
Yeah, I asked that question because my understanding was that ChatGPT and Gemini, because they work as ASR dictation models, they will transcribe speech and then compare the text to the model. So they work on text primarily. So, for instance, if I say the word color as opposed to collar, that's always been a difficult contrast for me. Then Gemini can see, oh, you actually said color instead of collar and give feedback on that. But that's because it compares its interpretation of the voice to of the recording to a text model. So and my understanding was that these models do not actually hear frequencies, do not actually hear formants. They cannot provide feedback on the actual acoustic properties of this speech stream.
Um, not completely correct.
Hmm.
They do
That's good to
they
know.
do hear, but ASR systems are not simply a pronunciation system. They're also built to take into account um, collocational probabilities and syntax and so sometimes they'll show something to be the word you intended even if you didn't pronounce it right. So this is always an issue with using ASR systems for pronunciation. If you do the pronunciation in a way that the sentences you say make sense, the system will fix it a lot of times. This is why a lot of the studies do word level practice with using ASR systems because then there's no grammatical probabilities.
So it's a lot of it is through context, right?
Right.
That the
Yeah. And
changes that
this
are
is
made. It's just like talking into Siri. It thinks you want to say something, and you may want to say that, but you may want to use a word that's not as common in
right.
right.
Yeah. And ASR systems treat common words differently than they do uncommon words. So, it's just it um they do hear, they're built on a system that is trained on enormous amounts of spoken data. That's Google ASR is so good because they have access to all of the spoken stuff that you all do on YouTube and other places. Um, and so this is where ASR has gotten much better for non-native speech. I think Gemini can transcribe above 90% of non-native speech correctly. Um, and if you go back even 25 years ago, even very intelligible non-native speech was only being transcribed at about 70% accuracy. So it has become much, much better. But that means for pronunciation, it's um,
It can be a double-edged sword,
right.
right? Okay.
Yeah, and
Suzanne?
Yeah.
most of us kind of we repurpose programs that were meant for other things because it's
The
a lot cheaper.
dictation stuff, right?
Right, it's a lot cheaper to
Right.
do it that way, or Google Translate or
Right,
things
right.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I
Yes.
mean,
Thank you
why
for
build it if you don't have to? Okay, let's hear from Suzanne.
Yeah, thank you so much for telling us about the study. It's fascinating. My question is more about methodology or how you accomplish this. The training interface, was this something that was ready-made, repurposed, or was
No,
it
created
developed
we
internally?
created it.
Okay.
Yeah. Two of the people on our study were um really good computer people. And then a couple of others were better than me, we'll put it that way. Yeah, when I first heard about this methodology, which actually gets used in engineering and computer science, this Wizard of Oz methodology, I almost laughed out loud because, I thought, seriously? But then it allowed us to control how much feedback was given correctly and how much was not. Okay.
So I'm just really, curious about this whole thing about limiting the feedback.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as a real teacher and with a real student, whether it must be just really difficult not to explain what was wrong and how to make a change to make it right. And so the whole idea of just saying, "Well, that was correct. You made your v like a v and your w like a w." I mean, like to me, that would be like, that's it.
Right. Remember that in a research study like this, you're trying to control as many variables as you can so that you can say the two top systems behaved in much the same way with the output or the outcome that we were looking at. It doesn't tell you that that's what you should do in a class. But, I go back to when I was first learning to teach, and Laura Hahn, who was at the University of Illinois at the time, um, she, when she would do ITA stuff, she would give them a maximum of 3 corrections on their presentation. And we were giving them a dozen or more, right? We were being complete. And her students did just as well as ours, maybe better. So, this idea of giving them you can give them too much. And maybe Marcia, you probably never do this, but I tend to talk to them too much.
Yes,
And
overload.
and and at a certain point, maybe they're not even hearing what
Yeah.
I first started to say.
Mhm.
So yes, the feedback could have been more complete. I have to agree. But it was effective. Um, and remember, this is also a one-time thing.
Right, right. So I guess my question is like in application. How does this study, or how should this study, or how do you envision this study as having any application to real life teaching? Or does it? Or is it only for computerized thingy things?
I think what it can say is that any kind of reasonably accurate feedback on someone's pronunciation, even if you don't explain it very much, um, seems to be effective. Could it be more effective? Yeah, I'm sure it can be because it was pretty bare bones. Um, and a lot of the stuff that we were working on at that time was trying to see not only can we give them accurate feedback, which is a question all in its own right, but if they have accurate feedback, what could they do next? And we were trying to build systems that would give more content in terms of articulatory advice or things like that. But those are not part of this study.
So Anastasia asks, how can we apply this in a classroom with limited IT access?
um, well, we remember we just used our IT to screw things up. um, I think what um, I would suggest also to Ani that look at the studies that are done in classrooms. Um, like Ines Martin's work on peer feedback. It's really, really good research and it's really applicable. And what she finds is that it's just, this peer feedback really works well. Um, so yeah.
So did you said earlier at the beginning about peer feedback and teacher feedback being equally beneficial to the learner? Did I
Yes,
hear that
yes,
correctly?
yes, in the short run,
In the short, what does short run mean? In the short run,
by the post test.
by the post test. Okay,
Then
and
they gave them a delayed post test. And what they found was that the peer feedback group got better and the teacher feedback group went back to where they started. They backslid.
oh, and the feedback. Do we? That was not as limited as the feedback you're talking about.
No, no, not at
I mean,
all.
this is feedback, whatever humanly
Right.
available feedback there was. Is that
Yeah.
right? I want to ask you if I heard this correctly. Did you say something about feedback givers have the most
In
gain?
in Ines Martin's earlier work, what she found is that the people she has a study that says giving is better than receiving. Um, and that the feedback givers actually improve more than the feedback receivers with peer groups.
Well, is that the same thing as tutoring and teaching makes you better?
It might be.
Is this
Or
kind of
if you
silly?
if you know that you have to give feedback to somebody else, you're a lot more careful to think about
Yeah,
what's going on.
maybe you analyze it and then decide on what the
Right.
procedure is and then being able to
So there's more metacognitive or information there.
yeah. Let's
Um,
let Patrick comment.
Oh, just very quickly, I wanted to say that I find the results of your experiment extremely promising. And thank you so much for doing it and for reporting on these results. But I'm also curious if you could point me towards some research from that you've conducted or any of your colleagues have conducted on the relative efficacy of different types of ASR feedback, especially
look
considering.
look at there's an article that was just came out in Language Teaching, the journal,
Mhm.
that I did with Shannon McCrocklin. It was a timeline of ASR studies. So you
Wonderful.
you you get you get 48 studies out of the 150 of them that we looked at.
Is
Um,
that 2026, 2025?
2025, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'll definitely read it.
Thank you very much, John Levis, for this excellent presentation. A lot of participation from our group here. I really appreciate that. So shout out to John, and hope that everybody has enjoyed and learned something today from the presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Levis. It's been really wonderful. Always
Thanks.
This is for us.
Thanks, Patrick. And nice to see all of you.